Thank you, and welcome again to the Creative Conversation. We have Charlie Waite with us today, and I know a number of you have been waiting for this moment, as have I. So I'll say thank you to Charlie before he joins us. I hope that he's listening at this point. I became aware of Charlie's work a number of years ago, 2005 to be exact, and I picked up a book of his in the bookstore while browsing in the photography section. And that was a book titled 50 Favorite Landscapes. And I have loved that book ever since then. And when I'm back home in West Virginia, I refer to it. I have very few of my photography books here in Portugal, which is a source of great angst. But I do have a couple of other of Charlie's books, including this book, which I love, In My Mind's Eye, Seeing in Black and White, and another book of Charlie's that I became aware of titled Developing Vision and Style. He's a contributor along with Joe Cornish and David Ward, two of my other favorite English photographers. And finally, a new book from Charlie just from this year, and that is Behind the Photograph. It's in a style similar to 50 Favorite Landscapes, but a great deal of information about why Charlie made the photograph, what appealed to him, what problems he had to solve. And I predict that we're going to hear more about that kind of thing during our presentation. So without further ado, I would ask Charlie to join us. And I would ask you all to go ahead and please to mute your microphone, and we'll all have an opportunity to say hi to Charlie after the presentation. Okay? Charlie, are you with us?
I feel that I am.
And you are.
I am.
There you are. Thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with us and giving us all an opportunity to get to know you and the work a little bit better.
Well, that's very lovely of you. It's very complimentary that you should have invited me. I'm not sure whether I'm visible. Am I?
You are visible, yes.
And the screen should say me and then landscape photography. I hope it does.
Well, no. At this point, we're seeing your face, so we're not seeing your screen. We're just seeing your face.
Okay, so let's just see what I have to do. I want to make sure. So I go over here and I do that. And that, and I hope now you do see.
We do, yes.
The screen there.
There we are.
Good.
Well done.
Well, the first thing I need to say is thank you everybody for coming to listen to me talk about my most passionate occupation, really. But also I need to say hello to a large number of friends who I have secretly noticed joining, and I'm really complimented that you should have come to listen to me. Forgive me if one or two things you've heard me say already, but I hope that maybe hearing them again might emphasize the degree of import I attach to them. I think the first thing I'd like to say is, I must watch the clock, 6 minutes past 6, is why. Well, there are two things I should say, but they're quite about this particular subject. Why are we all feeling so passionate about making photographs? You notice that the making is rather important, because I think taking suggests we just rock up and press the shutter and off we go. Photography is having to work very, very hard indeed to make itself heard. Very hard. More so in the UK and continental Europe. Thankfully, you in the US, I think, have really come round to realizing that photography actually is, dare we suggest, an art form. And it certainly is. After all, it's a form of human expression. It's a form of human response. It's about artistic interpretation. It's about relationships and all sorts of other things with the landscape. And I think the most important thing we need to remember is that we must apply ourselves to our production, which I think is what a photograph is. It's not just a photograph. We need to apply ourselves really, really, think of the best word, with as much astute understanding and almost make it a communion with the landscape. I mean, it's you may think this is rather over the top, but it's almost a quasi-religious experience.
Yes.
And one of the things that we're trying to do is honor what we're seeing. And I think there are times when all of us look up and look around and see a bird, see a worm, see a centipede, see a duck, see anything. And I think there are moments when we just are open-mouthed in amazement as to what this extraordinary experience is all about, this human experience, this nature experience, the planet, the stars, everything. And I think we get a sort of a sudden realization. And I think what we're doing when we want to make a photograph is we're trying to get as close as we can to ensure that our response to our world around us is as honorable and as honest as it possibly can be. And what we're really hoping, I think, is that when we see the finished image, both us and our friends will experience or re-experience or evoke, if you like, the experience we had at the time, which was one of wonder and, as I say, sort of communion, if you like. And the closer we get to getting near to that, the closer we get in terms of investigation and understanding, and I have a little pet phrase, forgive me everybody, you may have heard it before, visually agile, the more we immerse ourselves into our production, the more we will, the greater the reward. Because what, as photographers, we cannot possibly admit to saying we didn't notice something when we see the finished result. We should be able to turn our backs and almost describe in great detail what we have been not just looking at, but being super aware of. And I call it full immersion. And the lovely thing about full immersion is that if we were to come back, which is possibly quite likely after a day's photography, empty-handed, we're not really empty-handed. We're not at all really empty-handed because we've been engaged in the pursuit. We've been looking, we've been studying geometry, relationships, dimension, color, light. Oh, light, 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 light. You can, shout it forever. And so we become more and more involved with all of those things. And if we come away with the image that perhaps didn't quite work for whatever reason, and it's very tantalizing. Remember the great Ansel Adams, 12 a year, and you're doing well, he said. So, if we don't come away at the end of the day with something that really moves us and awakens us in the way that we were awoken by what we were photographing, then that's not the end of the world. We've been trying. And I think in life, aren't we all having a go? We're having a go at trying to understand who we are, what this is all about. And we, landscape photographers, use our camera as a conduit to get closer, basically, to get closer to beauty. Let's put it fundamentally. Beauty is, it's, I'm trying to think of the right way of putting it. It doesn't get the acclaim that it should get here. Because a lot of people say beauty, well, it's not really art, is it? It's, the image that we're making of the landscape, and these killer words, which I hate so much, representational, literal, decorative, and there's a fourth one, but I can't remember what it is. But very rarely will a beautiful landscape be given the title as an art form by a high-end gallery, dare I say, in perhaps New York or London. And yet they have they can have an immense effect emotionally and mentally on the human being when they're looking at it. Right. And we know that, how important that is. So having set the scene, as it were, excuse the pun, we're going to look at a few things that I think are important to me. The first one is a phrase that I really do like very much: recognition and pre-visualization blended together in one single moment of awareness. And that's your great Ansel Adams. And whatever one may think of him, some people are saying he's a bit passé, but actually he was a great artist and a great technician. He invented the histogram in the form of the zone system, let's not forget. He was the man who was able to talk about tonal values in black and white like no one else has ever done. He was an absolutely most marvelous photographer in my view. And to admit that he only managed 12 a year, I think was really something. So when it comes to us, recognition, we recognize the possibility of a photograph being made, then we pre-visualize, and he did. And then it's a question of battling and wrestling and trying to produce the image that had parity with his pre-visualization, and he had stratospherically high standards. If they failed, the image failed to reach those high standards, or the apparent image that he might make, then we can be sure he would not try and do it. There we are. This is what it was. He was described as being able to transform geographic reality into transcendent emotional experience. How beautifully put. How beautifully put. And what other criteria do we all have, and our colleagues and our friends who love landscape photography, apart from, are we moved? Or are we responding with just, yeah, very interesting, which I always think is the killer line. Very interesting. But in fact, what we'd love is for people to say, oh, that's just too wonderful. And then we just are happy and pleased that we've managed to convey a large percentage of our own emotional response to the person who then looks and hopefully enjoys our photograph. We'll soon come to the end of text. The great Cartier-Bresson, to make photographs is to recognize simultaneously and in a fraction of a second both the fact itself and the rigorous organization of visually perceived forms that give it meaning. It is putting one's head, one's eye, and one's heart on the same axis. To make photographs is to hold one's breath when all faculties converge in the face of fleeing reality. Fleeing reality. And it is at that moment that mastering an image becomes a great physical and intellectual joy. Now, who would think that mastering an image would become a great physical and intellectual joy? But don't we all know that when we've come away from making an image, we're quaking, we're sort of internally shivering with joy because we've connected and we've had that communion with the light and the color and the amazement. And so we've embraced and encapsulated that amazement in the form of our photograph. Right, black and white. Many people have said to me, and completely wrongly, that they say black and white is more, I hate this expression, more arty than color. What a lot of nonsense. And I have challenged people, and I'll never forget, and if you won't mind, I'll just quickly say, I said, why do you think it's more arty? Well, already beginning to feel rather unstable. Well, said this person, well, we don't see in color, so it's definitely more artistic. I see. Right, I challenged him. So color is not artistic. No, I'm not saying that. It's just that black and white is more. And you could see him begin to stumble. And I basically walked away. So, of course, black and white isn't more artistic. Of course, color isn't more artistic. They're both an attempt from the photographer, from the creative person, to produce an image that, as we say, has parity with their response. And they are making an artistic interpretation. And it's extraordinary to say that. However, black and white for many years was all there was. And I'm very influenced by black and white. We'll have a quick look at some of the people I've been influenced by. In 1904, Margaret Bork Waite walked into a Steinway piano workshop and saw this beautiful, rhythmical, voluptuous almost shapes of pianos about to be constructed. Wonderful. And how contemporary. Just extraordinary moment. Your great Edward Weston, he decided to produce this photograph of a cabbage leaf, not just simply, well, I'll do it in black and white because I don't have color, I'll do it in black and white. In fact, they did have color at that time, but he wanted to convey his sense of wonder at a cabbage leaf and how marvelous it was, and these beautiful lines, these extraordinary shapes. And so for him, it was a way of conveying to us, I want you to look at this cabbage leaf and see it not as a cabbage leaf, but as a thing to wonder at. Never mind that we're going to eat it. I mean, just look at this extraordinarily beautiful thing. And I think that's what photography does in such a powerful way to us all. Now, influences. Why did I show this, and this when I found myself in China in a place called Longcheng, a very, very difficult place to photograph because it was very much out of my comfort zone. I'd never seen a landscape like this in China before, but we could say, was I influenced by these images when I came to see that? Possibly subconsciously. and there's certainly a relationship, but let's just leave that hanging there. But let's be happy to admit and willingly and happily admit that we are influenced by other photographers. We are influenced by not just photographers, but by everything. Musicians are influenced, cooks are influenced, gardeners are influenced, painters and architects are influenced. It's a wonderful melee of people influencing one another, all building and creating and responding. And landscape photographers are certainly being influenced by one another. And it's a wonderful, beautiful thing. And let us continue to be so. I'm certainly influenced by lots of people. Was I influenced when the time came to find this beautiful swan? And its wings suddenly flapped up like that. And I thought, maybe that looks rather beautiful. But was I influenced by the previous images? Quite likely. Who knows? Maybe I even saw a photograph of these beautiful swan's feathers. Now we'll move on. The great Edward Weston with his peppers, the pepper series. It's worth noticing, and I hope you can see my cursor, that he chose to take another word. I'm going to use the same word, voluptuous, because it certainly is the voluptuous pepper. But let's just look how clever he was to have placed this pepper into a concave setting. So he didn't just plonk it onto a flat table. He wanted to embrace it and sort of hold it. And I think that was so exceptionally well done. And you can be sure that on the original, the highlights wouldn't have burnt out. Little quick technical thing. Pointed things. I know I've been influenced by pointed things. We'll move a little bit quicker now, but the Dolomites in Italy and relationships in landscape photographs, I think are really, really important. And what happens when we set up our camera and we put it on the tripod? We've already responded. And as Ansel said, Mr. Adams, we've already pre-visualized. And what happens when we find ourselves in a bit of a sort of pickle? We move to the right, we move to the left, we move up and down, and we just find ourselves not entirely comfortable. And that's a whole series of responses that are going on. And what we should be trying to do, and I think we probably do subconsciously, is try and imagine the image we're about to make and the image through our 36 by 24 millimeter rectangle, one day, maybe sooner rather than later, becoming a huge 5-foot image. And my word, when we make big prints, any errors made in the production stage are writ big. And that's why we need to be very analytical. We need to look at every single element. Let's just say, oh, I'll vignette the sides, because that's a good way of concealing the fact that I couldn't really cope with the sides of the image. So I'll just darken them a little bit and no one will go there. And anyway, I want the eye to reside at the center of the image. And Ansel Adams would never have said, I'll forget the sides. We're talking about an entire 100% canvas. We need to attend and intend what we want to have in the image. I have another little phrase, forgive me. Attend and intend, and let everything attended to be either intended or accepted to be there. So we will never, ever say later, oh, I never noticed that. I referred to that a moment ago. Pointed period. All of a sudden, I'm in Libya. I won't go into how I got there, but it was a commission to do a book on all of Libya. And I had just 4 weeks to do it. And I came back on, I think, whenever it was, something like the 17th of February. And the next day it all kicked off in Benghazi. I'd like to say I ran across rooftops, heroically getting away from the conflict. But actually, I came back on a perfectly normal British Airways scheduled flight. So nothing heroic for one moment. And I'm not particularly heroic anyway. I'm not a great trekker. I wish I did, but onward, but away from the points for a moment. It might be worth saying that I've got a little foible, which is something I almost feel I should be in therapy for, which is I'm not very keen on verticals bisecting horizontals. And just here on the right, you might see my cursor. The top of that little, I suppose you could say, thatched dwelling, which is too charming for words, especially this one. They're all slightly bent, was there until I managed to just get a little bit high and tuck it underneath. That's entirely a private thing. Don't feel you've also, you become obsessed. Oh, Charlie says we shouldn't have a vertical bisecting a horizontal. It's just that it's nice to offer the viewer dimension and depth, because with a landscape photograph, we have to remember that it's two-dimensional, and we're converting a three-dimensional image into a two-dimensional final print, as it were. We must print, but we'll talk about that later. And so we need to try and convey depth to mitigate the two-dimensional nature of the photograph. I really quite like looking at this in Namibia, and I think I might have to apply that word again, voluptuous, because it seems so appropriate. It's the third time I've used it, forgive me. But it seems so appropriate for this, because all the shadows, the highlights, the little pyramids, the little triangles, I find rather beautiful. I particularly like the way the shadows this highlight just runs out and becomes a shadow, because the light just can't get there. And here it's deep black. Now, my sister looked at this some years ago, Joanna, and she was, how can I put it, constructively critical, always constructively critical. And she looked at it and she said, Charlie, I love this. It's so rhythmical. And yet the sky, if you don't mind me saying, is wrong. And of course, I realized that she was right. And I know she's right. It was too chaotic. We had lovely grace and shapes, and as she said, rhythm in the sands and the dunes, and lovely interlocking of shapes, as I say, and triangles and hemispheres and all sorts, and diagonals and sweeping shapes all over the place, and then a kind of chaotic sky above. And she's absolutely right. I've gone back 3 or 4 times and can no longer go back. But it really should have had a mid-tone up there. Who knows? Maybe a zone 3 or 4 or something like that. This is very much out of my comfort zone in Mali, in Bamako, I think it was, where a fisherman was throwing a net. And I remember the top of my head was rather bloody. It really was, because this area here was lined with lead, and it kept hitting me. But the thing about photojournalism, which I said this sort of is in a way, you don't really have any control. There's a degree of hope. You have to be very fast to react, and I'm not the quickest person to react. But I had no idea that this beautiful line here, which you might see, I hope, which was a really wonderful bit of net where it folded and ending in a knot. I had no idea the knot would be exactly above his hand, offering a degree of order. I had no idea that this furled net would unfurl like this, and I had no idea that the net itself would act as a filter, as a neutral density filter, and reveal the clouds here and here, but not here. So that was a marvelous moment. And I was so pleased. And I had no idea that his hand would be in that shape. So the lovely thing about landscape is it's measured. It's a meditative experience. It's a contemplative experience. You can take your time and you can drink it in, and you can just absorb. And that's why when you come away from making a landscape photograph, whether you've made the image successfully or not, you feel absolutely heady with it, because you've connected with nature so profoundly. And as I say, it's a kind of communion. I never thought I'd find myself in the Amish country, and I must say it was a marvelous moment. It was very, very out of my comfort zone again. But I wonder if this is a question we might discuss at a later date. I wonder if I knew that his foot was up just at that moment that I pressed the shutter, and that his foot was there. So when we press the shutter, there are all sorts of things coming to play. We press the shutter. We hope we've grasped everything, and we've observed absolutely everything that's going to take place within our photograph, and that we have not overlooked a single element, and that we found great pleasure in the construction of our image, in our production, as we call it. But it may well be that other things are going on, and that there's a little signal that says now, that magical, beautiful moment where it's actually quite a humble little moment where we do something called depress the shutter. And at that moment, a massive event, all our preparation, everything that we've involved ourselves with, everything, absolutely everything comes rushing in through our lens and comes and impregnates itself on what used to be called film and now the sensor. And so all that preparation makes the whole process so beautiful. Elliot Erwitt. Just speechless. Felix, Gladys, and Rover, but I always love to think which is which. And it's a marvelous thought and wonderful how clever photojournalists and reportage photographers were in those days, and still are, where the lens, people often would say, the camera was set at a certain shutter speed, the aperture was set at a certain aperture, and they knew that any little event, be it large or small, that took place some 4, 5, or 6 feet away, which was perhaps their preferred compositional position, was going to be sharp, and they would freeze motion. So they could turn very quickly and nail an image in a heartbeat. I tried to do a similar thing, but I doubt that it got the same degree of laughter that the great Felix, Gladys, and Rover by Elliot Waite got. This was on a ferry toward the Isle of Wight in the Solent in southern England. There are moments when we don't really want to, this is one of mine, where we feel comfortable to choreograph and to instruct our cast, if you like, in the play. Could you move a little bit to the right? Could you move a little bit to the left? It's not a crime, far from it. In fact, wedding photographers have to do it all the time. And in many cases, some of the guests and the people in the photograph are going to be in the photograph that the wedding photographer is going to produce. They're not very subordinate, because many of them, of course, have had perhaps rather too much to drink. So it's extremely difficult for wedding photographers. I have immense admiration for them. But here I didn't ask these young ladies who were on their way to school, I didn't ask them to just stay there. They just were in a line to cross a ferry in Vietnam. These are things with photographs we've looked at that I wouldn't normally, I suppose, wouldn't normally be the sort of thing I would do, but who could resist these marvelous Shire horses? But I never knew that these marvelous animals, I'm getting to know them now much better, thanks to Keren and her education of me, of how special and how remarkable and how independent and how characterful and what huge personalities her Lusitano horses have, that she knows so incredibly well, and is sharing her expertise and her photography with us all to our great joy. And I had no idea, but I didn't know that these particular horses, were able to put one ear up and leave the other one down. It was quite marvelous. So this one here left one down, and it was almost as if he was taunting me. But what I was pleased about at the end was there was a sort of triangle, and eventually they all had their ears up. But I was absolutely battling to get it right. And for me, it was a photograph that was not quite what I normally do, but I'm secretly hugely proud of it. This always produces a bit of amusement, and we're talking about influences, remember? I don't know where I saw anything that influenced me to do this, but I wished I had commented on it in the way that somebody commented on it a few weeks ago, which when he saw this, when she saw this, she said, "Charlie, wouldn't it have been much better if the arrow had been pointing in the other direction?" And I thought that was really funny. I found myself chasing nuns, and as it were, in Siena, in Tuscany. Andre Curtish, an absolutely, it could almost brings me to tears, this extraordinarily beautifully constructed image. And if we unravel it, which I think is something that we all ought to do, of one another's photographs and images that we admire, let's look at them and not just globally see them and say, yeah, that's lovely, I love that one. Let's ask ourselves, when we look at a photograph, or that we detect one that we find hugely moving and we're impressed by, and that we really admire, let's unravel it and find out why it is we like it so much. And let's just do that momentarily. The hat, a little arc there, followed by another arc here by the vase, and an intact shadow just reaching the end of the table, and then another arc here down at the bottom stair, and then the main player, the big player, this wonderful sweeping black arc. We'll just go back, marvelous black arc there, made of the balustrade. So 3 arcs essentially, and then everywhere else diagonals and rectangles, but most especially rectangles. 1, and right angles. 2, the table itself, this door here, the mat, are absolutely littered with geometric shapes, but softened by these 3 arcs, and of course the flowers and the leaves themselves. This was seen by Andre Curtish in a heartbeat on his way to a painter friend, and just assessed it in a very, very short time. Didn't say, yes, I really like that hat. And of course, the coat here hanging the shoulder of the coat. And I really like the fact that it does this. It just would have been done globally. And I think a lot of us do that. And perhaps it's later that we say, oh, I'm glad I did that. But we did recognize and we did respond and we did attend to various elements. And it may be that we did semi-subconsciously and we weren't able to actually illustrate every single element within, but we were nevertheless attending to it. So that's what makes photography so wonderfully magical. And the last one, Henri Cartier-Bresson, I sometimes more emotional tugs going on because I love to look at this and I think I've loved it for so long in Sifnos in 1964. I thought, what is it that makes this image so powerful? And often the smallest element within a photograph can play the biggest role. And I think after probably 25 years or more, probably more, of studying and relishing it and loving it and never tiring of it, I've come to the conclusion it's her elbow. Now, you may well say, oh, Charlie, that's a bit of a tenuous link, but actually that elbow replicates, and forgive me, this is perhaps rather, as we say in this country, sad that I should have bothered to count up. It replicates 28 other right angles. So her little elbow being a right angle is duplicated everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Windows, doors, door frames, steps, these shadows here, everywhere. And I just think that there's a degree of cohesion and coherence within this photograph that I find absolutely deeply satisfying. Did he count 28 rectangles? I doubt it. But nevertheless, he did know that at that moment, and no, he didn't do lots of images. It didn't have long. She was running on her way to school. And I subsequently went to Sifnos and I met a lady coming down the steps and she had a small child with her. And I wondered I asked her if would she mind if her small child would do what Flora did in 1964. And she said, yes, no problem at all. My daughter, I am Flora's daughter, and this is Flora's granddaughter. So we hit it, we struck gold. It was a lovely moment. Wow. Right, away from influences, we'll see one more, choreographing. I mentioned it earlier in Myanmar, Lake Inle. If you are going to choreograph, in other words, if you're going to orchestrate an image to suit what you want, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's not a crime. Nothing really is a crime. It's just simply your own response. Whether you like to come across something and not orchestrate it and not fix it, then that's absolutely fine. And this one wasn't, but there did one before that I felt was unsatisfactory. Into color. Wow, what to say about color? Well, firstly, it needs to be trusted. With 350 million photographs being uploaded to Facebook every day, I know this because I've found out a few days before. It's such an extraordinary statistic. 85 million approximately being uploaded to Instagram every day. Quite what to say about that, I don't know, but I hope that our photography will endure perhaps rather longer than some of those 350 million images that go up a day, many of them done on iPhones, which is also not a crime. It's now their telephones are really very high end, but we're not going to go there. We're going to talk about color. So color, when people look at this one, made in Provence, I'm going to go speed up a little bit now. Many people ask me, was it really that color? And of course, I'm glad to say, yes, it was. But we'll find that many times, if we're vulnerable, or if we succumb, or put it another way, if we cross the line when we put an image onto our computer and we quietly think, I think I'm going to just pump that saturation up a little bit. Remember, if I can put it like this, you're messing with God's color and God's light. And if you want to do it, then do it. But don't forget that the eye of the viewer is very discerning. And if for one moment, just for one moment, they find themselves feeling that your image is dishonest and that it never happened, that relationship between viewer and your image is broken, and it's broken forevermore. And it's pretty serious. So at cost, at some cost, you could be like some photographers we all know about, who decide to cross the line and pump up the color. And those people who don't know about photography think it was a natural occurrence. But I personally find it rather, how can I put it? Well, politely, unpleasant. So moving on, emotion and photography. I don't mind telling you that I felt rather low on this occasion. Very unlike me. I'm not a melancholic person. My cup is almost always a half full, and yet I found myself feeling rather low, and I couldn't explain it. And was it possible that I gravitated toward this rather sorrowful little shed in a place called Auteuil in the Lot Valley in France, opposite next to the Dordogne department, because it in some way conveyed my sense of whatever it was, sorrow or just melancholia. The following, it was Christmas Day as it happened, and the following day I felt absolutely terrific. So it could well be that that's the case. Now, hoarfrost doesn't last long, 5 or 6 minutes once temperature goes up. So I look at this and I get much pleasure from it. There was a time when we opened what was then our Kodak little box of film, that it said, if you took out the little bit of paper that many of us didn't do after snapping open the grey cassette and the little black lid to it, many of us remember, and casting it to one side, what we didn't do was we didn't take the bit of paper out that gave us some characteristics of the film we were using, Kodachrome 25 or Ektachrome or Ektacolor or whatever it was. Well, in there it said, best have the sun out to make your photograph. So in those days, we all thought we've got to have the sun, and furthermore, we've got to have the sun behind us, which of course is not true. So we can photograph now in any light, and we've now got phenomenally, almost diabolical high ISO shutter speeds, 125,000 ISO. We ought to do our tests to find out at what point these high ISOs actually do collapse and are intolerable and of no use to man nor beast. But it's worth doing a test all the way from the very bottom, from 50 right the way through, and just putting them to one side and then saying to oneself, yeah, I think that will work. I can do that at 6,000 ISO because I did my test and it's perfectly acceptable. Moving a little bit quicker, Besançon, that was in France. Almond blossom. If you have if you want to experience absolute visual joy, take yourself to Andalusia, and many of us have. And Karen ran a trip to Andalusia, and we all know how lovely that was. Those of us who had the pleasure of going and saw the almond blossom, complete heaven. And they're short-lived. The blossom, as we know, only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. We'll just do a few almond blossoms. There's another one, and another one that was where we all went. It was just a lovely moment. Some people find that the lonely tree, I rather love it actually. I think the lonely tree allows us to appreciate its nobility and its stateliness. And the little saplings work rather well in a county called Berkshire in England. Avenues of trees reminiscent of cathedrals. I remember when I did this, a Frenchman came up, I'll never forget it, and he said, he came in his little deux chevaux, and he said in perfect English, "You are photographing my trees." And I said, "Oh, I'm really so sorry. I had no idea." And he jokingly said, "No, they are not my trees. But every time for the last 20 years, I have been passing these trees, and I always say to myself, one day I must make a photograph of these trees. And now an English fan is photographing my trees." And he was really rather dismayed, but I sent him a Polaroid. And it was fun. But if you are photographing avenues, and they are lovely, I think everyone will agree that they beckon you to discover what's at the other end. Try not to let the outside world in. I think that's really rather important, because if you do, it suddenly breaks the secrecy and the mysticism, if you like. I showed this to somebody years ago, and to an audience, and there was I think he was a brigadier or senior army officer who shouted out, bellowed out, when I showed this damn fine bottle of Chardonnay there in the middle of the image, and which was quite funny. And there I am saying, attend to everything and let everything attended to, etc. Well, I can now mock myself and say that I never saw this extraordinary shape of this bottle. I mean, there's the cork, Here's the top, and then all the way down, the perfect proportions. I was too busy trying to stop trees masking one another. It was very funny. Another last one of trees. I love this one very much. But my sister again made the most wonderful comment. She liked it too. And here's a comment that I've never had the like of again, and I will never ever forget it. She said, "Charlie, where is that?" And I said, "It's the Somme. It's the Somme from the Great War." And she said, "Oh my word." And immediately she said, "These are the souls of the young men. These reeds are the souls of the young men who failed to return home alive. And these are the young men who did and survived." And I said, "My word, what an interpretation." And she said, "Well, it just came to me." So it is marvelous, the power of the still image. Let us never forget, it is a still image. And I mean this most sincerely, and I will stand by this. A still image, the landscape images we make, are as important to other human beings, and can be, as a great piece of music, as a wonderful poem, as a beautiful garden, as a beautiful painting, as any other creative artistic endeavor. And don't let anybody suggest that what we're doing is really just a photograph. It's an immense production that's come from our heart and our soul. Another avenue near the place called Damme, not far from Ostend, and it was just rather enjoyable. It's a bit corny to say light at the end of the tunnel, but it sort of was, I guess. Felt terrifically protected. I mean, these trees are, hundreds of feet high, and they do. We all know now that they communicate with one another. I mean, I do sometimes think that we know hardly anything about the natural world, and we just say a lovely tree, but actually, for all we know, there's a language that they have between themselves. We're just not party to it. And so the more we attribute these things to other living beings in our surroundings and in nature, I think the better. Another avenue, and here I am attending an avenue of cloisters in Italy, attending and intending. I don't think so. When somebody said, I love the way you've got these looking as if they're steps going uphill on piano keys. It never occurred to me. Never occurred to me. So I'm ashamed to admit that I never noticed. Trees near Marseille. I think we all love trees. There's no question about it. And why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we? And that's why we weep when we hear of great forests, fires in the southern US. It's just heartbreaking, because I won't even say because we just all share that same terrible suffering and pain when we hear of fires in the US and elsewhere. But if you are going to photograph trees like these, try and let each one be identifiable. Just explore and try. There's a little one here where they're joined up, but try and have all of them just as single entities. I remember when I looked at this passing by, it didn't look like this. It actually looked nothing like it. The light wasn't there. There was no blue sky, and for all sorts of reasons that I can't fully remember, I just remember that basic thing of rejecting and saying no, not right. And so I carried on and driving. I was in the Somme. This was a place called Arras. And when I came back, it was wonderful. And it wasn't the blue sky working so well with the yellow. It was the fact that the water had subsided, and each little base of each tree had got a little belt around it. And that suddenly was the signal. And I call it the final signal, where we just think, yes, now is the time to depress the shutter. And I think that's a lovely moment when we have that confidence, because every artistic endeavor is and should be accompanied by a degree of insecurity, because we're in uncharted waters. And when you meet somebody who says, yes, oh, I've got lots of millions of photographs I absolutely love and they're amazing, I think we should maybe not take that too seriously. 12 a year and you're doing well, remember. So it's a real battle to produce a strong image. And if we can do our 12 a year, that's pretty good to me. Hoarfrost, do look out for it. If you're in North America, obviously you may find many chances. It really is worth getting up that early morning. And if you hear the temperature is going to drop, it's crucifyingly painful to get up at whatever it is, 5 in the morning, as we know. But it can be really rather enjoyable. And the hoarfrost lasts such a short time. Again, lines of trees. I know I'm influenced by the great Ansel Adams. Here's one fault, and that's the one that I couldn't bear to admit to. And I'm sure I could use Photoshop, but I couldn't live with myself. Here's another one just here too. I would have preferred to have got separation between all of them. There's no doubt that there's much more pleasure to see all of these trees over to one side, and where they're separate entities. There's no question about that. This was a strange experience. It's quite recent. It was probably less than a year ago, I think, and I've never seen trees appear blue. It was nothing to do with the color. It was nothing to do with white balance. They just did look like this. And the thing that was especially strange was that the foreground was sharp. The middle distance here, the middle was soft, the grasses, not the trees. And then the sharpness was recovered at the back of the image. So when I tried to explain that to myself, I realized that I couldn't. And then after a long amount of thinking, I realized that there had been a little rogue breeze, if breezes can be rogues, and the breeze had just briefly come through the middle here and moved the grasses over the exposure of about half a second or so, and made them blurred and softened them. So it was a very strange experience. But I do love these trees, and I find the blue and the yellow a rather wonderful relationship. It's been challenged a lot, but I did it on film as well, and the film also testified to the same coloring. Top light, lots of people say, oh, you shouldn't photograph in top light. You should really photograph in low lighting conditions. So you have a raking shadows, and you have a sense of dimension, and you need much more better relationship between shadows and highlights. So top light is aggressive, and it's ugly, and it's not complementary, and it's not flattering to the landscape. Well, I agree to a degree, but there are no rules. It all depends on the landscape. The two things I'm sad about, one is nearly cropped the top of that cloud, which is a small thing, but it mattered. But I'm so glad it was top light, because each of these shadows of these little olive trees is intact, and they're not bumping into each other. And I think when we look at shadows, we must remember that shadows and highlights play an equal part in delivering the finished image back to us. We mustn't just say, oh, that looks okay, the lighting looks all right. Let's look at the depth of the shadows, let's look at the brightness of the highlights, and let's hope that they work well together. They should be good buddies, and not fighting each other. As winter approaches, Northern America and in Northern Europe, look out for colors, and look out most especially for winter colors. Really enjoyable. This was in the Loire. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Serendipity. Just can't tell you how wonderful this experience was. Cows. I have great admiration for cows. I think they're rather underrated. But anyway, that's another thing. But they were right over to one side, way over to the right, and they're all in a cluster. And bit by bit, they arrived. Bit by bit, they arrived, and they began to assemble themselves in a line, all on the same axis, matching the axis of the far distant shore, matching the axis, if you like, of the little sloping hills and the foreground. But then the most catastrophic thing happened. Some of them sat down, and I cannot tell you what that felt like. So I started pleading in cow language, which I have to say is not my best language. And it was really difficult. And here's a little blob made up of two. Here's a cow with 6 legs. But generally speaking, the look of them is that they are all independent, and they're all in a line. And it was a marvelous, marvelous moment. And it's worth talking just briefly about the composition, which I think is the one thing that is so elusive for so many of us. Composition. We find it, sometimes we look and we say, it's such a giant landscape. It's so cumbersome. It's so overwhelmingly big. How on earth can I gather all of this huge landscape and encapsulate it into what we call a 36 by 24 millimeter rectangle, which is what film used to be. So it's absolutely fine to be wrestling with composition, almost your head in your hand, desperately trying to gather some sort of coherence and cohesion, looking for anchors, looking for the where you want the eye of the viewer to reside, and so on and so forth. So it's fine for it to be a difficult issue. The whole business of photography, never mind the technical, the aesthetics, is not easy. It's not easy. And, people used to say, well, you've got 36 goes, something bound to come out. What does that mean? Even when we made our image, we often said after depressing the shutter, oh, I hope that comes out. What on earth are we talking about? Is it down to hope? Did we not attend to our production? Well, we certainly are these days. So I did think, well, perhaps there's rather too much sky. There was a lot of rain in it, but I decided to leave it at that. So there we are. Light, look out for light. Look out for light all the time. See whether you want more light, less light, the color of light, the nature of light, how light reflects off and is absorbed off certain surfaces. See the way it casts shadows. Just have a love affair with light, in my view, and then you become closer to it and to the way it performs. I look at this sometimes and think, why was I so pleased to see this? That was in Yorkshire. This one is back in Myanmar. And I realized it was because of her. And I thought, if somebody could help me, if anybody who knows about ballet, of which I know very little, but I do love ballet, but there was no doubt a question. And I thought that's what appealed to me. And so perhaps somebody later on will be able to tell me what that ballet position is. The lonely tree and nobility and the stateliness of it. And to begin with, I thought, no, I can't do this photograph. I absolutely can't. The cloud's good where it is, but I can't do this photograph because the fence is not good. And then I realized, no, it is. It's an invitation. It's like somebody opening the door. Go on, Charlie, get on with it. And I'm glad I did get on with it in Andalusia. The little almond blossom, we'll quickly go through these. You find a relationship, and it's a very tenuous one. There's not much of it, and that's this little branch, this tree trunk, this little tiny almond blossom, very, very, just like a jewel, really, was echoed by this geological shape in the rock. So just little relationships like that are very good. Still with the lonely tree, no one can be blamed for the lonely tree. It's just a lovely thing to do. It's what I call a single punctuation in the landscape. It's a gesture, and it looks lovely. And it took a little while for this to be exactly above this. Looks like it's smoke. I'm not sure whether it actually means much, but I was very pleased to find the lonely cypress tree in Tuscany. There are moments where you feel that you've been touched by something divine. And I really did think that this marvelous tree was able to say to itself, you see, I am remarkable, and I am noble, and I am the king of trees. And that the light did it. It's theatrical lighting. And luckily I had my ladder, and there was a very compliant, friendly cloud with whom I have to make friends with regularly, who just managed to subdue the rather untidy foreground with their shadow. And it was almost as if the cloud was saying, Charlie, can I be of any help? Would you like me to put a shadow there just in the foreground, like where the footlights are on a theater stage? I said, yes, please. And very kindly the cloud did. And then one little gap for a fleeting moment suddenly, literally zapped the tree with a lovely warm light. And I'm glad I had my ladder because it allowed me to prevent the top of this tree encroaching up here onto this the continuation of the slope. So I'm not denying the viewer a sense of depth. I'm offering them this slope, and then I'm offering them this slope, and then this one. And really, I think that's the great key, to try and convey a little bit of depth. Not always, sometimes it's a flat pattern. The other thing that I was pleased with is this slope of this tree here, just about is parallel to the slope of this mountain here, which is again, something you might not notice, but when people enjoy a photograph, and we do that business of unraveling I was talking about earlier, it's hugely rewarding because, oh, that's why I like it. Yes, it wasn't just an accident. And a lot of people would say to us and our photography, oh, you were lucky to get that light. I sometimes think I'm aptly named, waiting about all over the place. The lonely tree in a field of flax. quite obvious. We know that something isolated and lonely and remote, we attend to it and we look at it and we get hopefully pleasure from it. I've never done this before, but I'm going to do it again. I hadn't realized that a leaf such as this one, which is a rhubarb leaf, could look so beautiful as it came to the end of its life. And the sun, when the sun came up, it resulted in this marvelous curling. And so I quickly got some black velvet and rather hastily put it up behind, because I wanted to show what a beautiful thing it was. All of this green, this curling, rolling over. And then 2 days later, it fell down. But it was almost more beautiful in its demise as it was when it was healthy. The panoramic, we often do stitch panoramic now. This was the panoramic camera. And it was a bit of serendipity, I have to say, but with a panoramic, it does not equate 3:1, really does not equate with human vision, which is more oval in my view. We don't, our periphery of our vision is not so expansive. And so we need an event to take place. And I had no boat when I arrived. I just had this little thatched dwelling and I had no ladder. So I rushed into a local school. Well, there were only 60 people living on the island in Lake Titicaca. and I begged the teacher if I could possibly get a desk. And brilliantly, he got his entire class of 12 children out and they all carried the desk. And I stood on the desk and it allowed me to just tuck the apex of this little thatched dwelling just underneath the range, the distant mountain range, because wouldn't it have looked awful if it was up here, breaking these clouds and denying the viewer the pleasure of these marvelous puffy cumulus. And then it had its own associated little triangle, so a nice relationship. But there was nothing to fill in this area. And then I can only think that my beloved mother said, "Oh dear Charlie, he needs something to fill that space. I'll bring in a boat and I'll give him a special bonus. I'll make the sail the same color as Lake Titicaca." Yes, I know, a bit diabolical, but I'm like that. So in comes a boat, enter stage right, the boat, and the wind doesn't get up until it's here. Then exactly when it passes by the grasses, the wind gets up, fills the sail, delivers a triangle just like its sail, matches the two triangles here, 4 triangles. The sail doesn't prick the top of the sky. And it was the most wonderful moment I can remember. It really, really was. It was just utterly exquisitely beautiful moment. And all of that coming together. Tuscany, the panoramic and the atmosphere, the romance. It's everything one would expect Tuscany to be. It has to rain the night before to ensure mist the following day. Namibia, a lovely part of the world to go to. The lady I went with, she was my guide, and then the next day a group arrived, and she was from Yorkshire, and I said, "Could you take me to the best view in all of Africa?" In all of Namibia. And she said, "I'll take you to the greatest view, in my view, of all of Africa." And she took me to this place. It was quite magnificent. And when I was here, we went very early in the morning. She said, "How far do you think it is from this spot to this spot, the front of the image to the back?" I said, "I don't know, a couple of miles." And she said it was 10 miles from there to there. And within 10 minutes, this lovely shadow, this razor edge shadow had gone, and these had filled up. So I'm not saying we've all got to do early rises, but we do know that shadows play a huge role in conveying a sense of depth and also shape. And I think we are aware of that. Otherwise, the photograph can look quite flat. So this little relationship of that little hill, mountain, top of that mountain, picks up with that and picks up with that and maybe that, and that one talks to that one. So little relationships do a lot. I look at this, it's quite near where I live. Do go out when it's raining, especially when the Met man says or wet woman says it's changeable. And we have, interestingly enough, you might be amused by this. We have many more meteorological weather forecasts, women meet female than we do men, and more often than not. And I've done a little statistic. The women are proved right when it comes to what the weather is going to do. So I'll leave that hanging. But I'd more than likely listen to a woman weather forecaster than I would a man. However, when I look at this, I think how lovely that was after the heavy rain that suddenly the sun came out. The one thing I rather wish is that the farmer had been a bit more sensitive and continued this hedge all the way from there to the middle to make it more of a cross. I was just being fussy. Um, uh, Looking at these marvelous diagonals, there was a stream here that had dried up, but you can see it's much greener. And I was rather pleased with that, I have to say. But the interlocking fingers is what I thought of on this occasion. And it was worth waiting for. So once you've established a landscape that you find pleasing in terms of its shape and design and relationships, do look at it under different lighting conditions and keep going back. And you may find that, and at different times of day, you may find that your beloved landscape is going to lend itself to being photographed at a time of day that perhaps you hadn't noticed. I find this extraordinary, really, very recently, because very few of us, including me, choose to adopt what is often a sort of Oriental style, sort of image you might see in Japan or China, a vertical panoramic, very strange. And yet, I rather like it. The tree and the poppies and mist, and then little a dwelling there, and then finally this mountain, Monte Amiata, right the way to the top. It's odd in a very blatantly obvious horizontal landscape, big sweeping horizontal lines. Why would I be perverse and just cut a bit out of the middle? But I had a go, and I'm quite happy to say I've got mixed feelings about it. I'd quite like to know what people think. This is in the Palouse area, across the pond where many of you are now. I've got mixed feelings about it, but I find it rather fun. Nothing more than that. It's not emotional, but it certainly will trigger some response. And I just thought it was yellow and blue and cold and warm are always very, very effective together. So blue and yellow, very effective. We'll go a little bit quicker. The Palouse shapes, quite fun little shapes. And another one. Sad that I wasn't able to do anything with the clouds on the right, but there it is. It was enjoyable. Back to the Lake District, Rydal Water, the ladder. And I'm not for a moment saying Charlie uses a ladder, we've all got to rush out and get a ladder. Absolutely not. There are times when we want to reveal more than conceal, and there are times when we want to conceal more than reveal. And from time to time, I like to be a little bit higher, and many of us will know from time to time we like to be lower. But on this occasion, I wanted a little bit of height so that I could see these reeds on this foreshore over here on this shore. And when I did not have my ladder, the tops of these reeds here masked these reeds. So we lost depth. And that was all there is to say about it. But I found it very beautiful. Some people say painterly. And if somebody says that, be thankful. It's a lovely compliment. In fact, we must all be thankful when somebody says something nice about our photograph. It suggests that we've given them pleasure through our photography. And through our discerning eye, we hope that we've delivered an image that they get pleasure from. And so it's a lovely compliment when somebody says that's a great image. Coming to the end now, because we've got to stop when we started. Mont Saint-Victoire, Cézanne painted it apparently 40 times. I quite like the sky, working with the rivulets, if that's the crevices in the rock. And it's a very tenuous link, but the tiles on the roof, and then of course the furrows here in the soil. So those relationships are always quite valuable, I think, to establish. Go a little bit quicker. The Pyrenees, heavy rain prior to this, and my mother was with me. I was working on a book on this part of the world, Landscape in Spain, I think it was called. And I said, oh, it's terrible rain. It's the 5th day. And she said, Charlie, have faith. Maybe just around the corner there will be something. And there was a little bit of light in this triangular shape. And I was very thankful to the farmer for making his tiled roof the same color as the russet bracken around the landscape. There are images that we look at and we can say, I can hear that waterfall. I can hear the tumultuous sound of that waterfall. And somebody very sweetly said about this, I can hear the splintering of that rock. And we all know that foreground interest is something that's prevailed over many years. Deliver to the viewer something up front to let them understand what prevails at the back. Not necessarily what we have to do. We don't have to do that. We may find lovely glistening reflections in a huge expanse of lake in the foreground, and that's our foreground interest. So there are no rules whatsoever. There just aren't. Sometimes the one that I think probably prevails more than any, and it might be the rule of thirds, and having your anchor if it's only one to one side. But look at me, I put something in the middle. So please don't feel, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be doing anything that what you feel is right. Go ahead and have faith in your own creative process. It's very important not to be governed by what photographic clubs, of which I have much admiration for, but by what, dare I say it, some of their, forgive me, jaded camera club judges say you should do this and you shouldn't do that. The big expansive view, not easy, really not easy. So try and find something that sort of hooks the eye in some way. It's terribly difficult, looking for elements within the photograph that come together and make a cohesive whole. This was in Wales. Big shapes like an amphitheatre near where I live in Dorset. And I was pleased to use the clouds. As we grow to come toward the end of this talk, do use clouds to your advantage. They are very, very helpful because they will orchestrate your lighting configuration in just the same way as a lighting director in a theatre will do. It's really well worthwhile saying, I need a bit of light there or I need less light here because I want to subdue this landscape. And all of this was courtesy of the clouds. Without the clouds, they would be shrieking out to me, very bright yellow fields. So now with that bank of clouds subduing this entire area, it meant that the eye was going to attend and be preoccupied and reside, if you like, on this area here. It was terribly helpful. The last few, I think now, another one. It's worth saying that this is very dense shadow, and it really was. There's a little place called Swindon. Poor Swindon is being consumed by cloud shadow. But I think I would like to admit to something that isn't right. And it's really important to point out the things that aren't right. And it's this foreground. I was longing for a cloud, as one does long for clouds, to subdue this immediate foreground because I wanted it to sit on a foundation of shadow, not a big one. And I've often been, somebody has told me ages ago, oh, Charlie, just get the Photoshop, do it Photoshop. Photoshop is wonderful. Digital is wonderful if it's used, in my view, Photoshop with restraint. And I think I hope Karen will agree with that. But it's a terrific tool to be able to use in moderation. We want the viewer to trust, as I've used that before. But a friend of mine said, Charlie, look, you can just darken this very quickly. You can burn it, and I know how to do that. But I would have preferred a cloud. So I've been back there and still haven't managed to do it. I would have preferred just a little shadow there. Italy, a just diabolical little scene against this blue rock. I look at this and I think, did they really build a little monastery there? Two or three more sodalite rocks in Namibia. And I think it's worth saying that there was no cloud when I arrived. And then thankfully, these lovely white clouds seemed to work quite well, really well, I thought, with the white flecks in the blue sodalite rock. It was terrific excitement when those clouds arrived. Little cameos, do look out for cameos. It's such fun. You weren't expecting it. And we all know that landscape photography, we're not talking about always the big landscape. Let's just talk about nature photography, photographing outside. Do look out for little cameos. That's what I meant when I was saying visually agile. You may find, I remember when we were all in Scotland, some of us together on one of Karen's workshops, we saw darling little beautiful cameos because the wonderful thing about our photography is it forces you to notice things, to notice beauty, to detect beauty and relish beauty and wonder at beauty. It doesn't have to be the big landscape. It can be something that's just a matter of a few inches wide. And within that, it lies various little elements that are as important as giant cypress trees and oak trees and so on. We'll finish with this because there are elements of sometimes that comes into our landscape photography that we're very thankful for, like Titicaca. And these were bales that were introduced from the States, actually, that replaced rectangular bales that we had in the UK. And I remember seeing these bales and thinking, just blue sky, really dull. I can't just have blue sky, but I like the relationship of the bales. And I thought they would look very good. And especially this distant one looked absolutely huge, like a giant building. And this one much smaller. And it was just plain blue sky. But way over to the right, I saw a collection of clouds that I thought, could they possibly keep their shape? Could they possibly remain intact with one big cloud here and then a smaller and smaller and smaller clouds? Is it possible that they could just deliver themselves on top of my bales like this and be the shapes they are? And they did. And somebody was at work. It must have been written in the stars. But just as they arrived, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to run as fast as I can to get my ladder, because as I stood there, the top of this bale here pricked the belly of the cloud here, not here, but just here. Now imagine how crucifyingly painful it would have been if the top of this bale was here. Sorry, I'll just go back. The top of that bale were there and not where it is now. And I got my ladder. It was only 2 steps, and I just managed to arrange for this cloud to sit as it did so sweetly above that bale. So we go to China for the next photograph, but I'd like to end on this because I wanted to be strict to the time. And Karen said we need to leave space, which I shall look forward to hugely, for some question and hopefully some coherent answers from me.
Thank you, Charlie.
So I hope you've enjoyed that. So
Well,
I'll
I
leave
know that we all have, yes, but I'm going to let them say so. And so I am going to stop your screen sharing so that we can see you. There you are. And first, before everyone starts chiming in, I do have a couple of questions that people have sent on the chat function. So if I may, let me do those first. And last one first, Suzette asked, were the blossoms that we just saw a moment ago in that photograph floating on the water?
Yes, they were bougainvillea petals. And I didn't know much about bougainvillea petals, but they're very brittle and they absorb water. They don't absorb water very quickly. And they were on the swimming pool surface. And as I arrived at a hotel in Jordan, I think, unbelievably, the gardener was sweeping them all away with a big net. And I was brokenhearted. And in the middle of the night, I thought, I hope you won't mind, but I got up very, very almost in the middle of the night, got a carrier bag, wandered around the hotel grounds and picked all sorts of lots and lots of handfuls of bougainvillea petals, and then came back and at dawn virtually, I strewn in the past or strew all the bougainvillea petals I had over the swimming pool. And I was ready to start photographing, at which point the gardener saw me, who had spent a good half hour clearing them, but he very generously said, I'll help you. And he made sure that while I photographed, he put some petals onto the water. But it reminded me of I think, a funeral ceremony in India where petals, is that correct, go onto the water. So nice question, thank you. And I really enjoyed that photograph, and it works quite well as a print.
Ah, very good. I would imagine that it would. Very large format.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to combine 2 questions that we had. And one of the questions was, are you almost always on a tripod? And then when you're making your images, are you making a number of exposures, or are you much more deliberate about it and just saying, right, almost there, okay, fine, click? So
two questions, both very good questions. Photographers have a love-hate relationship with their tripods, but we know that if we don't have our tripod with us, 1/3 of the capacity of the camera and its functionality is denied us. No possibility to use any shutter speed longer than a 30th. So all those 15ths, eighths, quarters, halves, ones, twos, fours that we might want to be able to convey a sense of movement in the water, not too much, hopefully, but a degree of movement. We might want to convey a sense of movement of flora and fauna. So we can't do it. We can't, even with a monopod, we can't brace ourselves. So we have to remember that without a tripod, we can't essentially use long shutter speeds. Now, I know a tripod can be infuriating, but try and get a light one, but at the same time, a robust one. And those two things don't often come together.
Right.
So I try to use a tripod, but do not feel that in order to make a great image, and we have to ask ourselves what that is, but we think we've already discussed what a great image is. It's one that pleases yourself primarily, and then one hopefully that other people will enjoy and that has parity with what you planned. If we want to make great images along those lines, then let's use any tool we need to use to assist us to do so. And when it comes to making one or two exposures, I would love to say that hand on heart, I could say that was the truth. It absolutely isn't. There's no crime in doing a number of exposures either side of the event that you're hoping to secure on your film or your sensor. It is not a crime. It's actually prudent. It's a very smart thing to do because you can't predict.
Yes, but we want to do it mindfully. In other words, we're not just sitting there, click, click, click. We're deciding whether we're going to change exposure, whether we're going to change our depth of field. So it's an exercise in a deeper exploration, if I may.
You may, absolutely. I concur with that.
Good.
Done with understanding and intent,
Yes.
not just why. It's an insurance policy,
Yes.
and you want to pack up and leave your landscape setting feeling that hopefully you've been successful, and you may find that you could do 5 or 6 exposures or more. It's in pursuit of the one that you're trying to get right. But as Karen says, mindfully, know what you're doing, not just sort of grossly just snapping away. We don't do that.
Great. I have another question from Doug, and he's asking specifically about the image of the Amish people. Were you set up on the tripod, and as the men just happened to walk through, was it serendipity, or what? Were you set up and waiting for the action then?
A good question. Firstly, I felt deeply uncomfortable, and I almost feel that I should have written to them to apologize, because I think photographing people is very invasive experience, and it's difficult to do it. I should have asked permission. I should have shown them the result afterwards, but knowing the Amish people as we do, they reject, and sometimes I understand, many elements of the 21st century. And I used a little Ricoh camera, so I had no tripod. And I had already established that the building to the right, and they were going to celebrate in somebody's home, was a good setting. And I knew that they came in that same way, walking to effectively to church on that day. And so I was there a week later, and I was pleased. It worked well. But I did feel a bit, no, I felt very uncomfortable. It's terribly intrusive and it's unsettling, and people feel, as we know in the old days in Africa, soul is being stolen away and so on. So, but I was very pleased with it nevertheless.
Very good. Very good. I have just one more that was written in, and then I'm going to ask everyone to please feel free to use your own voice. Marcia was asking, have you felt that there's ever been a negative impact on your professional career because you choose not to manipulate your photos hugely in post-processing? So I guess she's asking, how far will you go to express your intent? And have you ever felt the push to go further from a gallerist or from a person purchasing a photo or a magazine editor, for example?
I know that in years gone by that one used to have to leave a certain area of the image for text if it was going to be for the front of a book cover.
Mhm.
or for stock agencies with Getty or whoever. But my reason for not doing much manipulation is that I'm not very good at it, um, and I would like to be better. I think I could, in some cases, improve some of my images. I can dodge and burn, and I regard Photoshop as a bit of an electronic darkroom, really. Paper, we could use paper that had 5 grades, so we could make contrast changes. We had a little bleach called potassium ferrocyanide. Sometimes hurt when it touched your fingers, but you could bleach a black and white image. But I'm not being sort of precious and what's the word, suggesting for a moment that oh, I don't do it, I don't do Photoshop. Oh no, that is absolutely not what I'm saying. I think Photoshop is marvelous. People are brilliant at it, and I think it's unfair in a way to say that it's digital art. They're just simply using Photoshop as a means to, as an extension of their creative artistic intention, and I think that's where it's so wonderful. So we must herald Photoshop and Lightroom and all of the other manipulating software that's available. My only thing, Marsha, is to say, a great question actually, is that I think we perhaps shouldn't cross the line, that's all. And I think if we produce something, and it's often saturation, that makes people feel distrusting of the color that you've pumped up, then I think it's a pity, because you've lost that viewer's confidence in your artwork.
That's right.
And I think that's a sadness. Do you agree, Karen, with that?
I do agree, and what has happened is that if we are lucky enough to make a wonderful image and we haven't monkeyed with the color or altered it in any substantial way, and we show someone a photograph and then they say, "Oh, that's really well done in Photoshop," we're completely crestfallen at that point because everyone's used to saying, "Oh, well, it couldn't have been, it's just been photoshopped." And you're crushed, because your integrity, your desire to have integrity in your images is just completely thrown out the window. And that that's a very general statement, but it has happened to me, and it's crushing. And so for that reason, I do agree that we should guard against it. Things should look as natural as they possibly can. And but it is incumbent upon us to choose our contrast point, our white point, our black point, all of these things that really, well, to quote your great influence and most of ours, I suspect, Ansel Adams, that the print is the performance, the image, making the image is the score, and the print is the performance. And so it is an extension of the rest of our artistic intent for the image, but
Mm.
with with um, with integrity, I think.
Yep.
Yes. So, anyone else, please turn on your microphone, say hello to Charlie. I know there are friends here that are wanting to say hello, and we can't all speak at once, but let's have at it.
Hi, Charlie. It's Marie.
Hello, Marie. How nice to hear you.
Nice to see you. To carry that conversation a little further, the use of textures and a lot of other parts of I will say like enhancing a flower photograph, that kind of thing. Um, I assume you're thinking that that's photographic art and that it's not seen as natural in the sense that you would take it outside, but seen as a piece of art by itself. I don't know. Question.
Um, well, my feeling is that we're all on a search. We're all trying to respond to something that we find beautiful, and sometimes our interpretation of something beautiful we want to enhance, to convey the beauty in the way that we feel it could be conveyed. So I think really it's a question of, to use that word, integrity, and try as best one can to produce an image that has parity with what we feel it meant to us. And I think if we're going to use our image manipulating software, then we ideally should use it to the benefit uh, of the image ultimately. And I think that's really the key. That's our criteria for where to stop. Because if we go to a point where we really don't have much confidence in our manipulating that we have done from, let's say, from the natural beginning, the flower, then perhaps other people won't. However, there's people who are doing, as we know, multiple exposure, ICM. There are all sorts of marvelous experimental types of photography
Yes.
going on, and we all have our own signature. We all have our own way of doing things and our own way of seeing things, and all of it is valid. And it's something that we mustn't just give up because we feel that we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't cook that kind of a cake. It's entirely down to us. The only criteria I can honestly say is be honest to oneself, maintain one's artistic integrity, and try and produce a photograph that is not going to be negatively impacted on by mismanagement and over engineering in your case. And I think if you can beware of that and just hold on and exercise a little restraint, it must be terribly tempting. I know one photographer who will go all the way with the saturation, and it becomes lurid and unbelievable and not very nice actually. And it never, you don't need to intensify Utah and Arizona colors, really, do you? They're red enough. So my feeling is go ahead, use Photoshop and Lightroom and all the other manipulating software with restraint and with great care. But they're there for our use, and it's wonderful. It's truly wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd like to say hi. How do I do that?
You're doing it.
It's Joanne. It's
Hi,
Joanne.
Charlie.
Hello.
I'm envious of your 6 feet, how many? 3 inches? And I'm barely 5 feet, and you need a ladder. Can you imagine what I need to get up higher?
Well, you don't all remember, you're seeing things from your height, so you're not vertically challenged. You may actually be able to see things that I don't see because I'm not 5 foot whatever it is. So you just, it might be worthwhile if you like to have a little very lightweight, incredibly lightweight 2 or 3 step ladder, 2-3 step. I mean, just to get up to a couple of feet can be very good. But you might well find that going lower it suits you. And I often find myself thinking, gosh, I'm glad I crouched down, because I would never have been able to get that beautiful flower in the foreground or whatever it might be. So it's not always a case of, higher is better, taller is better. Not at all. It's there may be very many images that you have made that I would not have been able to, simply because I wasn't able to see them at that height.
Well, I've been known to stand on top of my car, but not my new car.
Very good.
Yes, well, the great Ansel Adams did that. But that's a little step ladder. You can now get a step ladder that collapses, and you can put a little belt around it, and it's very light. It will weigh just a matter of pounds. Anyway, lovely to know that you're there, Joanne. Thank you.
Can we say hi from here?
Hi, Jerry.
Charlie, hello, it's Jerry and Joe. He was saying hi to you. Anyway, loved the presentation, and Joe and I are traveling. We're on the road, so you've just given me days worth of inspiration.
Oh my word!
Stick your head out here.
Hi, Charlie. Good job.
Nice to meet you, Joe. Good job. I'm happy if you give me that. That's very kind of you. Well, I have to thank Karen for inviting me and having faith in me, and I'm really grateful to you all.
Well, we look forward to seeing you on Whidbey Island next year.
Yes.
I'm on the way. I'm on the way. It will happen. All of this will soon be history.
Yeah.
Can't wait. Cannot wait. Okay, I have to run now. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Well, unless there's another question, I'm going to be timely here, and I'm going to say once again, thank you to Charlie. He's been a great inspiration to me for many, many years, and I know for you as well. And thank you for taking the time to answer the questions and We'll have the recording up, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, and I'll send the link to everyone, so you needn't worry about that. And, oh, the one thing I do want to say.
Oh, yeah.
From Charlie. It's very important because it's, well, I'll just take another moment and I'll say that the cover image, along with a number of images inside, particularly in the beginning, are a departure from, to use Charlie's word, voluptuous, curvy images. They're images that I, in speaking with Charlie about, have felt are decisive in some way. And so, Charlie, you might want to talk about that a little bit if you like. But I would just like to say that it is a wonderful book and one that has opened my eyes to your evolution in photography. And that's fascinating for me.
Well, I'm very glad how sweet of you, Karen, to mention those, because I've got a second half, if you like, to this presentation that incorporates them. And
Well,
there's
that means
probably
that you have to come back.
another.
Yay.
Well,
Like that.
if my audience are happy to return, I once thought that I'm quite good for insomniacs, but that's just me thinking. I go on and on and on, but I am. It's because I'm passionate about it all, and I'm keen to share the things I've learned from other people and over the years and observing and so on. So I'm passing on. We all pass on things so to other people and to the future generations, and that's what makes the world go round, if you like. But I do have about another 30 or 40 photographs, and the second half of this would incorporate those, which I do enjoy talking about. So if you care to invite me back, I'd be delighted to do so.
You have a standing invitation, and we will work out the date so that we can get everyone back together again. So thank you for that. All right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in, and look for email in the coming week or so. And again, next Friday with Honey Lazar, and the following Friday with Tony Sweet. And we'll look forward to the day that Charlie's back with us. Thank you again, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Be well and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well, Karen, most of
Thank
all.
I
Yes.
shall. Thank you, Suzette. Bye, everyone.
Bye for now. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.